An army so large it stretched beyond the horizon, so vast that ancient historians claimed it drank entire rivers dry as it marched. A force that crushed kingdoms simply by arriving. And standing in its path was a narrow strip of land wedged between mountains and sea, a place barely wide enough for 2 chariots to pass. And guarding that passage were just 300 men. They weren't trapped, they weren't surrounded, they weren't confused about what was coming. They knew exactly who was marching toward them. They knew how many soldiers followed the banners of the Persian king. They knew that surrender meant survival. And still they stayed. This wasn't courage born from ignorance. It wasn't desperation. It was a decision made with open eyes, because these men had already accepted their fate before the first arrow was fired. Behind them stood Greece, not a united nation, but a fragile collection of rival cities that rarely agreed on anything. Ahead of them stood the greatest empire the world had ever seen, commanded by a ruler who believed himself chosen by the gods to rule all mankind. The Persian king offered them mercy. He offered them life. All they had to do was kneel. Instead, they prepared to die. History often remembers victories. It celebrates conquerors, empires, and kings who lived long enough to see their names carved into stone. But sometimes, history remembers something else. Sometimes it remembers the moment when a handful of men looked at impossible odds and refused to step aside. Not because they thought they could win, but because they believed that some lines should never be crossed. What happened at Thermopylae was not a misunderstanding. It was not a tactical error. It was not a heroic accident. It was a deliberate last stand. So the question that echoes through time isn't how they died, it's why they chose to stand at all. If you enjoy history told like a movie, make sure you're subscribed, because from this moment on, the story only gets darker, bloodier, and impossible to forget. To understand why the stand at Thermopylae mattered, you first need to understand the scale of what was coming. Persia in the 5th century BC was not merely a powerful kingdom, it was the largest empire the world had ever known. Its borders stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the edge of Egypt in the west. Dozens of nations, cultures, and languages existed under one ruler. That ruler was King Xerxes I. Xerxes was not simply a monarch, he believed himself to be divinely appointed. To him, resistance was not political defiance, it was an offense against cosmic order. When he inherited the throne from his father, Darius the Great, he also inherited a wound that had never healed. 10 years earlier, a coalition of Greek city-states had humiliated Persia at the Battle of Marathon. A smaller Greek army had defeated Persian forces and shattered the myth that the empire could not be beaten. Darius vowed revenge, but died before he could deliver it. Xerxes would not make the same mistake. He would not send a punishment force, he would send annihilation. For 4 years, Persia prepared. Soldiers were conscripted from every corner of the empire. Infantry, cavalry, archers, engineers, and sailors moved westward in numbers so vast that supply alone became a weapon. Herodotus claimed the Persian army numbered more than 1 million men. Modern historians debate that figure, suggesting numbers between 70,000 and 300,000. But the precise count hardly mattered. Even the smallest estimate represented a force Greece could not defeat in open battle. Xerxes did not merely march, he reshaped the world to accommodate his army. A canal was carved through a mountain to allow the Persian fleet safe passage. A bridge of ships was lashed together across the Hellespont, creating a floating road from Asia into Europe. When storms destroyed the first bridge, Xerxes ordered the sea whipped as punishment, and the engineers executed. It was a message to men and nature alike. Nothing was beyond his authority. As the Persian host advanced, fear spread through Greece. City after city submitted without resistance. Northern states bent the knee, choosing survival over defiance. Greece was not a unified nation. It was a fractured world of rivals, often at war with one another. Now, those divisions threatened to doom them all. Faced with extinction, an alliance formed. It was fragile, uneasy, and born of necessity. But when the question arose of who would lead the land forces, the answer was immediate: Sparta. Sparta was feared across Greece. Its soldiers were unmatched, its discipline legendary. If anyone could slow the Persian juggernaut, it was Sparta. The plan devised by the Greek leadership was simple and desperate. They would block the Persian army at a narrow mountain pass, while the Greek navy engaged the Persian fleet at sea. If the pass could be held, Persia's greatest advantage, its numbers, would become useless. The chosen location was Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a narrow corridor between steep mountains and the sea. In some places, the road was barely wide enough for a few men to stand shoulder to shoulder. Here, a smaller force could hold off a massive army, at least for a time. But time was all Greece could hope for. Xerxes continued his march south, confident, unstoppable, and certain that resistance would crumble once his army arrived. To him, Thermopylae was not a battlefield, it was an inconvenience. Quick question while the storm gathers. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments. Because what followed would turn this narrow mountain pass into one of the bloodiest killing grounds in history.
Sparta was unlike any other city in Greece. It did not value art, philosophy, or debate. It valued obedience, discipline, and war. Everything in Spartan society existed for one purpose: to produce perfect soldiers. From birth, a Spartan male belonged to the state. Elders inspected newborns, and any infant deemed weak was abandoned. Survival itself was the first test of worth. At the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and placed into the agoj, a brutal state-run training system that lasted more than a decade. They were taught to endure hunger, pain, and fear without complaint. They were underfed to encourage stealing, then punished savagely if caught. The lesson was not morality, but competence. Failure was shame. Endurance was everything. Physical training was relentless. Wrestling, running, weapons drills, and formation fighting consumed their lives. They slept in barracks, wore minimal clothing, and learned to obey orders instantly. Emotional weakness was crushed. Courage was sacred. Cowardice was worse than death. By adulthood, a Spartan soldier was not an individual. He was a component of a larger machine. That machine was the phalanx. Spartan hoplites fought in tight formation, shields overlapping, spears thrusting forward in unison. Each man protected the one beside him. Breaking formation meant death, not only for yourself, but for everyone around you. This system forged King Leonidas. Leonidas was not a distant ruler. He trained, fought, and endured the same hardships as his men. When news arrived of Xerxes' invasion, Leonidas understood the reality immediately. Sparta could not defeat Persia in open terrain, but Persia could be delayed. The Greek strategy relied on geography. Themistocles, an Athenian general, proposed blocking the Persian army at Thermopylae, while the Greek navy confronted the Persian fleet at Artemisium. The narrow pass would nullify Persian numbers, forcing them into a brutal frontal assault against heavily armored hoplites. Thermopylae was ideal. Mountains rose steeply on one side, the sea pressed close on the other. There was no room for cavalry maneuvers or flanking attacks. It was a place where discipline and armor could overcome sheer mass. But timing complicated everything. The invasion coincided with sacred festivals, including Sparta's own religious observances that forbade full military deployment. Spartan law was strict, even in the face of annihilation. The compromise was extraordinary. Leonidas would march north immediately with his personal guard of 300 men. These were not young recruits, they were seasoned veterans, hand-picked for skill and loyalty. Herodotus records a chilling detail. Leonidas chose men who already had sons, ensuring their family lines would survive. It suggests Leonidas understood this mission was likely fatal. Before departing, Leonidas consulted the oracle of Delphi. The prophecy was unmistakable. Either Sparta would fall or a Spartan king would die. There was no third option. Leonidas accepted the burden without hesitation. He marched north, gathering allies along the way. Thespians, Thebans, and soldiers from other city-states joined the column. By the time they reached Thermopylae, the Greek force numbered roughly 7,000 men. They rebuilt an old defensive wall at the narrowest point of the pass and prepared to meet the largest army the world had ever assembled. If this level of detail is new to you, hit subscribe. This channel doesn't skip the dark parts of history.
When Xerxes arrived at Thermopylae, he was confused. He had expected submission, not defiance. A tiny force blocked his path, standing calmly as if unaware of the doom approaching them. For 4 days, Xerxes waited. He believed fear alone would dissolve Greek resistance. It did not. The Spartans did not retreat. They exercised, oiled their bodies, and combed their hair, a ritual performed before battles they did not expect to survive. When Xerxes sent messengers demanding surrender, Leonidas's reply was brief and infamous: "Come and take them." On the 5th day, Xerxes lost patience. He ordered the attack. The battle began with arrows. Thousands upon thousands of them darkened the sky. Greek shields rose as one, forming a shell of bronze. The arrows clattered harmlessly against metal and wood. When the Persian infantry advanced, they entered a nightmare. Persian soldiers carried shorter spears and lighter shields. They surged forward, compressed by their own numbers. The Spartans met them in perfect formation. Spears thrust forward in disciplined rhythm. Persian shields shattered. Men fell and were trampled by those behind them. The narrow pass turned into a killing funnel. Xerxes sent wave after wave. None broke the line. The Greeks rotated fighters, keeping their front ranks fresh. The Persians could not do the same. Bodies piled high. Blood soaked the ground. The sea lapped at corpses. Enraged, Xerxes committed his elite, the Immortals. 10,000 of Persia's finest warriors, called immortal because their numbers were always maintained. They advanced with confidence, expecting victory where others had failed. They died like the rest. The Greeks introduced a deadly tactic, feigned retreat. The phalanx appeared to break, drawing Persians forward in disorder. Then, suddenly, the Greeks turned, shields locked, spears leveled, cutting down their pursuers. Panic spread through Persian ranks. Discipline collapsed. Herodotus wrote that Xerxes leapt from his throne in fury as he watched his best troops slaughtered. The pass became a charnel house. For 2 days, the Greeks held. Casualties mounted into the thousands for Persia. Greek losses were minimal. By the end of the 2nd day, it appeared impossible for Persia to win. Superior numbers meant nothing in the hot gates. Training, armor, and discipline ruled the battlefield. At this moment, the war could have changed. Xerxes could have withdrawn. He could have searched for another route. He could have accepted delay. Instead, he chose escalation. So ask yourself this: if you were watching from Xerxes' throne, would you retreat or would you double down? Comment your answer now, because the decision he made next would seal the fate of everyone at Thermopylae. While the Greeks rested after 2 days of slaughter, a single man approached the Persian camp. His name was Ephialtes.
a local who knew the mountains intimately. He offered Xerxes a secret, a hidden path that led behind the Greek position, the Anopeia path. Xerxes did not hesitate. He sent a force of Immortals under cover of darkness to follow Ephialtes through the mountains. Leonidas knew of the path and had stationed Phocian troops to guard it, but they were outmatched and misled. By dawn, the Persians were behind the Greeks. The message reached Leonidas quickly. The pass was lost. Surrounded from front and rear, annihilation was certain. Leonidas called a council. Most Greek commanders argued for retreat. Leonidas agreed. The majority of the army was dismissed. They escaped to fight another day. Leonidas stayed. So did his 300 Spartans and 700 Thespians who refused to leave. They understood what this meant. Leonidas reportedly told his men to eat a hearty breakfast because that night they would dine in the underworld. When the Persians advanced, the Greeks charged out from behind their wall into the wider part of the pass, determined to kill as many as possible. The final battle was chaos. Spears snapped, swords shattered, men fought with broken weapons, fists and teeth. Leonidas fell early, and a savage struggle erupted over his body. The Greeks recovered it multiple times, refusing to let the Persians claim their king. Eventually, numbers prevailed. The Greeks were driven onto a small hill. Surrounded on all sides, they made their last stand. Persian archers ended it with a storm of arrows. When the fighting ended, nearly all were dead. If this moment gives you chills, subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.
On the surface, Thermopylae was a Persian victory. The pass fell. Xerxes marched south and burned Athens. Leonidas's body was mutilated in rage. But the story did not end there. The delay at Thermopylae bought Greece precious time. The Greek fleet regrouped. At Salamis, Persian naval power was shattered. A year later, at Plataea, the Persian land army was destroyed. Thermopylae became legend, a symbol of defiance, a reminder that resistance could inspire unity. A stone inscription was raised that read, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." They lost the battle, but they changed history. Which last stand should we cover next? Tell us in the comments.